Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lempa, your regular host. On today's episode, we're going to go back into physical training and fitness and sort of weaponising ourselves to be really good Army officers and soldiers, but also, more broadly, competitive outside and really fit, efficient, amazing soldiers and officers. My guest today is Warrant Officer Class 2 Tavis Nicholson. He is the Warrant Officer Physical Training Instructor at the Royal Military College Duntroon, teaching the newest staff cadets how to sort of that baseline fitness level to get them to a point where they can move into their first units and sort of going through those baby steps. He started his career as an infantryman in Tuaria in the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, and then switched over to PTIs. He's posted at ADF School of Special Operations and started the Human Performance Wing. He also posted to 3 Brigade headquarters as the PTI up in 3 Brigade, and then he's been a PTI for 13 years, and he's our resident PTI. He's done a previous episode called Beyond Snake Bites, the Evolution of Army Physical Training. That talked about the philosophy behind how we get after fitness. This one is well aimed at the practical application of designing programs, getting after the things that you should be getting after, and considering all of the holistic approaches to fitness and your job role. Welcome back to the podcast, Tav.
G'day, sir. Thanks for having me. Resident PDI, can add it to the list of things I've been called over my career. But yeah, sorry, ladies and gents, you're going to get the word according to Tav in the physical training sense today. But thanks for having me back, and looking forward to today's episode.
Oh, you say thanks for having me back. I've been hounding you to do a second episode, so it's good. Thank you for coming back on. It's absolutely awesome. If we hit the topic straight on, the last episode, we talked about the philosophy of training and how, like, the evolution of, we used to just do the same thing, brute force, every single day per week, and it was hard. And then obviously science has grown, and you made the argument that in the last decade, sports science has just sort of moved quicker than it ever has, and there's so much to sort of pass over to people so they know the best way to design an elite program for themselves or run PT at a unit. If we go into that component of like the actual how we get after training, a lot of people throughout their careers, we also go on learning journeys and we prioritise maybe strength for a bit. And all we do is heavy lifting because we want to look absolutely massive, and we're getting our calorie intake up. Aerobic, so anything aerobic is like working against us because it's, it'll put us in a calorie deficit. You would have heard all these things, I imagine, before.
For sure.
Or vice versa. We're rake thin and we absolutely love running. We're trying to keep our weight down so that we can run quicker, trying to get efficient, using oxygen better and the like. Weapon runners, and we absolutely love it, right? 2, we're setting a main effort for ourselves and ignoring all of the other things that you talked about in the last episode that come into your job role and being in the Army. Can you go through any personal anecdotes about your personal fitness journey, maybe before you become a WO PTI or a PTI more broadly? What sort of key moments in your career have sort of shaped the way you look at or changed the way you look at fitness?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those people that you've talked about in that sort of anecdote, I've been all of them at various parts throughout my career, but probably the one that stands out the most was certainly in my time when I first got the battalion, as I spoke about last episode. I was quite a small individual, but aerobic capacity, running, low 8-minute BFAs and could do push-ups and pull-ups till the cows came home. I was really good in those sort of capacities there. It wasn't until I deployed to Iraq in 2006 and, was carrying the GLA, was also the number 2 we were carrying Mag 58s in the section there. So I had 7.62 link and some of the loads that we were carrying over there in the hot and in that austere environment really was probably an awakening for me that I'd neglected some of the other facets of physical training in preparation for what I needed to do, and specifically sort of around that strength and stability and my body's ability to carry that load for extended periods of time and sort of recover and do that day and day and day again. So for me, it was quite humbling at that time, and I had a section commander who was quite boisterous and loved the gym, and he basically sort of took me under his wing and took me in there. And I'm not ashamed to say the first couple of times I folded like a deck chair under just a 20 kilo barbell. Like I was just really that inefficient in that strength capacity. But that was something that, and probably a realization. And at that point early on in my career, I was like, hey, I need to look at all these other facets and have a more balanced approach to physical preparation.
And the organisation or that my job role requires more than just banging out shitloads of being sort of lean and banging out heaps of heaves and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
It desires
absolutely.
more. What did that feel like when you sort of, so you're quite confident? We talked about last time going straight into your first section as an infantryman, and you're sort of trying to set an awesome bar, right? So you're smashing. Like we talked about the quantitative stuff in PT. It's a really good way to show that you are hardworking and you are fit and set a really good example. And then vice versa, go through the pre-deployment and you get into Iraq. What does it feel like to maybe? So I've had a few people that can run, can't pack much, and they're like, I cannot. Like I'm shuffling the whole time. These are trainees at ADFA.
Yeah.
I can't keep up, right?
Yeah.
It's demoralizing. I suppose maybe not demoralizing for you in Iraq, but like how did that feel when you were just like completely couldn't keep up, or it just you weren't as much of a weapon as you were when you were in barracks setting those awesome examples at the start?
Yeah, for sure. And it probably wasn't the case that I couldn't keep up, but it was grinding on me day in, day out, and just the constant churn of patrolling and the loads that we were carrying was taking its toll. And at the crux of it, again, being a new guy in a section quite early on in my career as well, getting a deployment to at that time, a war zone like Iraq, I just really wanted to hold my weight, and I did not want to be that weak link within the section and have something that was within my control in terms of, hey, I could prepare myself better to be better at my job, hold me back and more importantly, hold the section back. So that was kind of that real realization. And I was fortunate, like I said, my secco took me under his wing, got me into the gym, and that's kind of really where the journey sort of started.
Yeah. That's an amazing anecdote, and I think so many people will resonate with it because we've all been at that point where we can't quite, or it's harder than we think, or that we don't want to. I think that disappointment thing, we don't want to let the team down.
Yeah,
so you have to be good across all of the qualities, I suppose. Leads into our first sort of point, which is what are the physical qualities we've talked about we should be good at? I talked about aerobic, anything aerobic will sort of eat away at gains, and gains are good and vice versa. What are the qualities that we should be getting after in terms of designing our physical fitness, or more broadly, what is required of us in that sense?
Yeah, certainly. So I think, and I'll talk to some, I guess, like fundamental pillars, and then some sort of secondary qualities that layer over on top of that. But certainly at the base of the pyramid and the performance pyramid that we'll get to and talk to later, aerobic capacity is probably the king of all the capacities and requirements that we need, and across all of the PESA research and all of the stuff that's out there from a military context. It is the most important capacity that contributes to success in those occupational tasks. So it should be a foundational pillar and certainly a focus for all physical training programs for tactical professionals and especially in the Australian Army. Coming in then, you've got strength. As I talked to, in my example, I had a really, really good aerobic capacity, but I had neglected the strength. Strength is that ability to produce force, and it links to, again, all of those load carriage type activities that form the cornerstone of many tactical tasks there. Strength endurance is another sort of big rock capacity that we need, and that's that translation from that strength and that baseline level of strength and that ability to produce force time and time again at the commensurate level to conduct whatever that tactical task is. The second and third sort of capacities that sit over the top of that, and they actually require a good foundation in those two capacities that I've just spoken to, is sort of then our power and our anaerobic capacity and endurance and stuff like that. And it sounds really sciencey, and for those that aren't familiar with those terms and bits and pieces today, I'll try and do my best to break it down. That's part of half the battle of being a physical training instructor, and that art and science of programming that I talked about is taking that, the science and the sports science and making that palatable for our population, the tactical population, and the soldiers that are ultimately going to do the training that we design. So yeah, we'll deep dive some of those qualities today. I'll talk to some frameworks that I've used over the years that have been a really good guiding heuristics and general frameworks that sort of set up my programming moving forward, and hopefully some golden nuggets that people can take away. We'll also, as we spoke about before, I'll drop some resources into the show notes and links so that, if it piques someone's interest in something that we talk about today, I've actually got some documents there that they can go and read and do some further research on and go from there.
So you just made an argument like power, strength, aerobic, power, anaerobic. I'm going to go straight to strength and power. Like it seems like this is synonymous, right? So if you're strong, how are you not powerful as well? And vice versa. It sounds like the same thing. What is the difference between those two? If we're getting to the heart of these sort of qualities?
Yeah, for sure. So strength is your ability to produce force, and power is your ability to express that force, like in a more higher intensity type sort of mode. So as an example, you might have someone that is really strong in the back squat, right? But then you get them to try and jump up onto a box and express that in a powerful, like unloaded, like just in their body weight, unloaded and express that power and jumping up onto that box and repeating that time and time again. They just don't have the ability, that the muscles, the tendons, the central nervous system doesn't have the ability to utilize that force that they can produce in an effective manner. So I guess like in a very layman's terms, and we're just hitting the wave tops here, there'll be exercise scientists out there that have, be cringing at my analysis or of those two sort of things. But at the crux of it, strength is your ability to produce force and power is your ability to express that force in a more dynamic manner.
Yeah. That's an awesome example. The box thing as well, like MAS, when you're trying to run off a line and you just can't move quickly enough, like that's like that power is just not there.
For sure. And you look at some people that are quite stocky or, have a really good high level of relative strength, of absolute strength. And I guess I can talk to a point of diminishing returns, like that we're talking about now building capacities that contribute to success in occupational tasks. There's a point there that putting an extra 2 kilos on your back squat is actually not going to make you a better soldier.
Yeah.
But being able to translate that force that you can produce through that strength training into a more dynamic movement. Think about coming into a room to clear that room and being agile and explosive enough to push off that leg.
Yeah.
Reorientate, engage the target, so on and so forth. That's probably more bang for buck, and that's where you're going to have that transfer of like, hey, I'm strong enough. I now need to make that strength useful in an occupational specific context.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's strength power.
Yeah.
Let's go to aerobic, anaerobic. What's the difference in those two
Very similar
systems?
Yeah. So the aerobic is the underpinning fundamental quality that is required from an energy system standpoint. And it also is the foundation that builds your ability to actually do anaerobic type sort of work. So when we're talking anaerobic, it's primarily without oxygen as the primary source of energy, and it's that more shorter, sharper, explosive stuff. The funny thing with the aerobic capacity as well, it actually is complementary to the anaerobic. Yes, it builds the base, but with a more and higher functioning aerobic system, you can recover quicker from bouts of anaerobic activity. So that shorter, sharper stuff, think about foreign movement, think about casualty drags, so on and so forth. The better your aerobic base is, it sets up the conditions for you to be able to execute those more higher intensity anaerobic tasks.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so that's the 5 qualities. I've left strength and endurance out, but we're going to talk about that throughout. But those 5 different qualities. Now, you use Bondarchuk's sort of model to look at, and a pyramid, you talked about it before. Can we step back a bit? Why Bondarchuk? Who is he, and what's the model? Yeah,
for sure. You've done really well pronouncing that name there. So Anatoly Bondarchuk was a Soviet athletic coach, primarily concerned with training throwing athletes. So you probably are now thinking, and same with the punters out there listening, what's the link?
We'll get back there.
But he created I guess you could call it a performance pyramid that sort of categorizes exercises into, general preparatory exercises, specific preparatory exercises, specific developmental, and then competitive exercises. So the competitive exercises sit at the top of the pyramid there. And when I translate that to a military context, I look at that he looks at it as the athletic event. If I'm a shot putter, that's throwing the shot put. For us, that is the tactical task. That is what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. The layers to the pyramid underneath is where the money is at. And typically, and I've made this mistake as well, is trying to get too specific too early and trying to replicate that tactical task or what we're trying to do as the foundation of our program, neglecting the foundations. So, we should sort of sit in the general preparatory phase and preparatory tier and the specific preparatory tier, I think, from a physical training perspective, because those qualities and building those qualities sets the conditions for us to be able to translate that into what we actually need to do. It's a good model, and full disclosure, that's a model that works for me, and there's plenty out there, but I've found that, translating that across, and that's that art and science of programming that I spoke about last time, it's been a really good model that sort of shaped how I've programmed moving through my physical training career. And it's a good sort of heuristic and a good, I guess, like benchmark to come back and look at it and go, hey, am I getting too specific too early? So yeah, it's just a really good model. And as I said, we'll drop that pyramid into the show notes because a picture paints 1,000 words.
Yeah, it's always difficult to describe a pyramid when, or a model or something. Yeah.
And I think, once people, and with, I guess, that context that I've probably butchered, but hopefully articulated not too badly just then, people will see how that's applicable to our context.
Now, I think that it is difficult to sort of describe something that is a picture in words. It's difficult. We're going to throw it in the show notes as well. But I think an awesome way to get after it and to explain the concept or the pyramid or the model is to talk through a specific example, right? So like you've got cadets here that are about to move into first class. They're doing fire movement, a significant amount of deliberate clearances as part of their tactical tasks that they're doing. And they should progress as they go and get more and more efficient at sort of fire movement. If we talk to a potentially more sterile example of that, or training fire movement, or a test in PESA, for example, or something like that, how do we use this model to sort of develop our training or understand why training is developed in a certain way to get to that main event, which is that fire movement test, or that deliberate clearance?
Yeah, for sure. And that's probably a really good link to make. And if I use fire and movement as an example, so that competitive exercise in Bondarchuk's model, that top tier is the tactical task, that is fire and movement. So like if we want to prepare people for fire movement, is just doing fire movement the best way to do it? Probably not. If we come down to the next tier there, and this is probably where people are going to resonate with it more, like we're close to that tactical task. We're now in that specific developmental exercise phase. What's the thing that we always do to train for fire and movement? We prop and drop. So it's almost the activity, but it's not quite, right? So that sits in that next tier under. Again, it is an effective way to train for fire and movement, but if you don't have the underpinning qualities such as, that horizontal pushing strength, like for some people, it's really hard to get off the ground.
You put a combat helmet on, body armor, and you like start to push and try and get off the ground.
For sure.
Difficult for, different qualities, physical qualities.
Yeah. And, we talk back to our strength and our power example that we used before. Some people are quite strong, but they're not dynamic, or they can't express that force, right? So they're not dynamic. They can't get off the ground quick enough if we're looking in from a PESA, right, to make that next bound within that time frame or whatever it may be. So yeah, the underpinning qualities there would be like, upper body horizontal pushing strength and the power and the ability to get off the ground nice and quick. And also thinking back now, our aerobic capacity, right, that underpins everything. Our ability to recover between high intensity bouts and bounds and bounds and bounds and bounds and bounds and fire movement is actually linked to our aerobic capacity and our ability there. So yeah, often we've always tried to go for the top of the tier, and we sort of or the second tier at the top there, but
which is almost the top tier,
almost the top. But we've neglected all of those underpinning qualities. So I look at it, as I said, and as a framework, it's been really useful throughout my time to anchor myself to like, okay, cool, that's where I want to get to is the top of the tier. But there's some steps that I have to step through to get there. And in that fire and movement example, it's like building an aerobic capacity and an aerobic base, layering in some anaerobic training over the top now. So we're doing some more high intensity stuff. And it might not be, getting up and down off the ground. It might just be the running portion of it.
Yeah.
We've got our upper body horizontal pushing strength. Okay, cool, that's ticked off. Now can we translate that strength into power and a dynamic movement getting off the ground? Once we've got all those things and we're happy with that quality and the foundations there, that's when we can layer in the top two tiers of the pyramid.
Yeah, that's an awesome example. Really good. And that's a way easier way to explain the model as it sits and to not rush to that second top tier to like, I've sort of broken it up. I did a sort of progressive thing. It's like, no, come back to the base. And those qualities that you talked about before being strength and aerobic.
Yeah.
If we launch then into strength training and how we should design that, we have a finite number of, and we're going to go, I think at the end of the episode, we're going to talk to avatars and something you've designed, which is with DSCG and stuff. And we'll talk to that. Before we get to those, how we should be training, talk to strength. We have a finite number of sessions in the week, right? How should we be splitting these sessions up? And how should we go about just strength training as one of those base level, sort of inside the pyramid at the bottom that underpins all of the rest of the competition and like weaponizing ourselves and stuff, that baseline. Yep. How do we go about strength? How do we split it up?
Yeah, so absolutely. Strength is one of those underpinning fundamental qualities is important to program in. I think we spoke to last time around the theory of it, and I won't get too deep into that as well. But that's obviously also going to be dictated by your baseline and where you sit there. But if I look at it just more broadly in general, from my experience and some models and things that I've used over the years that have sort of set up my strength programming and how I look at it, one of the models that I've used is Joe Ken's tier system. So he looks at it like from a movement based perspective and looks at like full body movements, upper body movements, and lower body movements. So it's a good way to categorize movements that you want to train within a strength capacity in a strength session and make sure that they're targeted at those areas of the body that you want to use. I've laid in, I guess, like another layer onto that tier system and look at it from a priority emphasis. So we look at it, and we've already spoken to strength, power, and muscular endurance. Within a section, within a platoon, there's going to be varying levels of what people need and what they need to prioritize. So using Joe Ken's tier model and some stuff that I've done previously, I will prioritize what that person needs front up in the session, but full well knowing that they might only have one exposure to strength that week. You can't neglect those other qualities as well. So, prioritizing for someone who's got like a high level of relative strength, but they can't express that force in a powerful type sort of way, I'll prioritize their lifts front up with a power emphasis. So they might be doing some lighter loads, some more ballistic type sort of lifting, jumping, whatever is commensurate to their ability. The second tier of their programming, or the second exercise within that day, they'll then do some maintenance strength work because it's important to keep touching that, dosing that strength in to maintain their strength along the way. And then they might finish with some muscular endurance, some hypertrophy, get a bit of a pump on, leave the gym, high fives, life's great. Conversely, if someone has low levels of relative strength, we're going to prioritize that front up because we've already talked about how that is the underpinning quality that's required for power. So, but again, I might put power then as the second tier. And some purists out there will say, yeah, well, hey, you can't put power there because they'll be fatigued from the strength and this, that, and the other. But my argument is, again, looking at it more broadly from an occupational sense. And if you were an Olympic weightlifter, absolutely that would be the wrong way to train because your sport and the demands of your sport and what you need to do is specific to generating the most amount of power front up and getting that bar up overhead. But for us, when we just use fire and movement as an example, it's quite a powerful and anaerobic type activity that might be done 2 hours into patrol, 8 hours into patrol, 10 hours into patrol. So I still think it's important to dose those qualities in and expose people to power and explosiveness, but under some fatigue as well.
Yeah.
That's sort of some of the models that I've used. And again, I'll drop those in the show notes and talk to how and what that looks like. And we'll talk to those avatars at the end of the episode of I guess, like a 3 and a 5 day program of how we would program strength in.
And so we know how we're supposed to split it up and what we should prioritize over others. You talked a little bit about ability-based stuff, and we'll touch on that after I talk about the rate of effort and stuff. With the aerobic stuff, it's quite easy. I think most people would understand that, like, measuring your rate of effort is easy because, like, your heart rate or zone 2 or zone running and vice versa, and some like app can tell you exactly what's going on. Your watch can like tell you where to go. With lifting, we're just at the top of the episode, we made it argument that you're trying to get as big as you can, so you're always lifting heavy. Everyone's watching in the gym, so you're trying to lift as much weight as you can. You're talking about putting 2 kilos on your back squat, so constantly trying to get there. How do we measure our rate of effort, or like the way we go about the training as we progress through the week? Is it always flat out? I know the answer to this question, but is it always flat out, or do we how do we measure that effort?
For sure. And I guess the most distinguishing thing about strength training and how I talked about before, strength, relative strength, muscular endurance, and power, is the intensity at which, so you can have an exercise, you can do a bench press that trains strength, you can do a bench press that trains power, and you can do a bench press that trains muscular endurance. The only thing that changes there, it's not the exercise, it's the intent. And the intensity at which you conduct that lift, and so on and so forth. So it is a really important part to make sure that we're actually dialing in and training the quality that we want to train is that intensity prescription. There's no one prescription that works best in any situation. I've probably got my thoughts, which I'll get to in the last sort of, I guess, method of what is most optimal. But it's not always feasible because it involves equipment and other bits and pieces. But most people out there who have trained have probably followed a percentage of 1RM program. It's not a bad way to do it. It's subjective in what you do, because you do a baseline test and then you work out your programming based off those percentages and create progressive overload that way. The only issue is obviously in a military context, sometimes we don't have that ability to follow a program to a T, and we have all of these other different stresses and occupational tasks that take us away or whatever it may be. So percentage, that is one of the cons to a percentage-based approach. Another one that is more, I guess, auto-regulatory in its sense is it goes off the day-to-day fluctuations, is like reps in reserve or RPE. They're more subjective than objective. So
is it rate of perceived effort? Is it
rate of perceived exertion or reps in reserve? So typically, if you've followed a program and it says, 6 to 8 reps with 2 RIR means like 2 reps in reserve. So don't go to Max Bickey's, 8 reps. You want to leave 2 in the tank, sort of thing. But again, with that subjective type sort of prescription, it makes a lot of assumptions there that the person knows what that feels like. And again, I've used all of these prescriptions and trained for a long period of time now. And it can be hard subjectively to be like, oh, was there 2 in the tank, or was there actually 4, or did I only go 1 in the tank? So it's more subjective in its prescription. The last one that I'll touch on, and I think is the best way to do it, and hopefully we can sort of evolve and bring this in large scale across Army, is velocity based training. So it uses a linear positional transducer. Sounds like super awesome, and it's out of Back to the Future or something like that. But in its most simplest form, it's a stopwatch on a tape measure, and it measures your bar velocity and how fast you're moving that. And that lines up with those things and those strength qualities. The faster you move the bar, the more you're like training power and explosive strength. The slower, you're probably down around that strength side of the house and bits and pieces like that. But again, the con to that is it's a $1,000 unit, which links to an iPad and all those other bits and pieces as well. So there's a few things there, but certainly it's important to find what works in your context. And it's certainly something that you need to do and measure, and qualitatively or quantitatively, like what is the intensity of the session and what is the stress that we're trying to elicit.
Yeah. With your last measurement, you were talking about how having an iPad next to a stopwatch on a band for a really arbitrary explanation.
Yep.
But it's basically beeping at you or making different noises and giving you a sort of a measurement or something that you can measure the entire time as you're lifting, say a deadlift or something. If you're going too slow, too quick, whatever it may be.
Yeah, for sure. The best way, and another way to explain it is it's a heart rate monitor for a barbell. And it's, just like you would use your heart rate monitor, which we'll get to in the next sort of quality and how do we measure aerobic capacity, just like you'd use heart rate zones or whatever as a measure of intensity for that aerobic capacity, is a way that you can objectify and know that you're training that actual quality that you've gone into the gym to train that day.
Yeah.
But again, lots of constraints there, resourcing, money, education on the equipment and other bits and pieces. And it is used, obviously, talking to in my time in SOCOM there, it's used in some of those smaller niche areas across Army and has proved its benefits. So, the world of going to Tav, and, I'd like to come back in 10 years as Mr. Nicholson and look back in on the organisation and everyone's rolling those kind of things. But, hey, we'll wait and see.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely awesome. But more pragmatic. There's a varying level of subjectivity to objectivity.
Yeah.
And they give you, there's multiple different tools that you've used across your entire career to a great degree.
Yep.
It's just what you can have and that more pragmatic approach.
For sure. And what you have available to you at the time and your resourcing and your unit context.
Yeah. Absolutely awesome. Right. You've just given me an awesome segue in one of the previous sentences to move into aerobic sort of capacity and looking at that. If we change tack to how do we break up our aerobic training? It's all a mix. So we've got some strength in there. We're looking at prioritizing power over strength more broadly and the like. Now let's shift to aerobic capacity and building that. How do we get after a training program, or how do we split up a week for aerobic base?
Yeah, for sure. And again, I'll talk to a little bit in the latter half of the episode when we talk to those avatars and stuff like that. It's all going to be context dependent. So in a perfect world, you'd have 5 days a week and you'd be able to split your training sessions up. You'd be able to split your aerobic sessions up. You'd be able to factor in recovery and all of these different pieces that are, contribute to success in a physical preparation and training program. But sometimes that's not the case, and you may have to train some capacities and competing capacities within a single session and stuff like that. But I think if we look at aerobic capacity more broadly, the underpinning quality and that foundation quality and what builds that is, I call it cardiac output, which is sort of a term coined by Joel Jamieson. If anyone's interested, he has some really good stuff on energy system development out there. He's trained a lot of MMA fighters and sort of really dug deep into that sort of niche energy system development stuff. He calls it cardiac output, but you probably know it as zone 2. Phil Maffetone calls it MAF.
Yeah.
Right. And that's probably another thing that if I talk to it a little bit, some of the terminology and stuff that I've used today, that's stuff that I've used and read over the years. But sports science, like all sorts of sciences out there, some people call it different things, but they all mean the same thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so certainly aerobic capacity, cardiac output, zone 2 should be non-negotiable in all physical training programs. It builds that base and it builds the ability to do all of those other tasks as we spoke about. How do we do that? We can run, we can row, we can ski, we can bike. It's less about, use that bench press example, it's less about the actual exercise. It's about training at that required intensity. You made that leap before, and that link to it's more accessible these days. Most people have a Garmin, they've got a heart rate monitor. The information is out there. If we want to hit in that zone 2, you stick in zone 2. It's zones, right? It's pretty sort of foolproof. So that's a really good tool and a really good thing. But as I said, it's a non-negotiable and should be a non-negotiable in all programs.
I think it is somewhat, it seems when you don't know enough about the physical body and fitness and stuff, it seems counterintuitive to run super slow, right? Because I'm going to do, say, a really terrible training program would be, I want to run faster 5K. So I'm going to run 3 times a week, 5Ks as hard as I can, right? Yep. And it seems counterintuitive to slow down and maybe even enjoy running rather than just trying to get oxygen in the whole time and struggling and stuff. How important is it? It's obviously so important to slow down and do that zone running. What does it sort of do?
Yep. So, I mean, as I said, I think I've labored the point, it builds the base. But you're exactly right. It takes a lot of discipline to stay within that zone. But if I link it back to the Bondarchuk model again, if you go, hey, the competitive event that I want to do is run that fastest 5K, okay. Well, the base of that pyramid is that you have a high functioning aerobic capacity and aerobic system. The best way to train that, and we know that the science says it, is to slow down. Yeah. Super counterintuitive. But if you just take that sort of objective look at it, that's the best way to achieve success in that task. I need to do this. Personal anecdote, we just did a staff PT session this morning. Miko's triangle, for anyone out there who's ever done it before, heinous session, but really, really good. And I sort of got into the 6th and 7th round and tanked, didn't meet my calorie targets and bits and pieces. For me, and that's a high intensity session, right? It's every minute on the minute, calorie targets, bike, ski, row, and then a minute rest for 10 rounds. So a 40-minute session, great session. I would look at that and taking that approach that you've just talked to, I would think I just need to do more higher intensity stuff on the ski and the row. But knowing what I know now, actually the thing that's holding me back is my base and my ability to recover between those high intensity bouts and efforts, as we spoke to earlier. That's the thing. And the way to train that is to go slower.
Yeah. I think that the examples are perfect at explaining why that it's important and then when you're running and you're running heaps slower because you're in zone 2 and people are flying past you, that's fine. You can concentrate because Tav said that time that I need to slow down and build my base because it'll make me,
The world according to Tav.
No, that's absolutely awesome. So I suppose that's cardiac output, zone 2, MAF method, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Let's go to the next sort of component, which is sort of intervals or the MAS that we've been running and doing.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the next sort of tiered up and bits and pieces and I guess methodologies that I've used and people are probably familiar with because they've been popularized, right? Is maximal MAS or maximal aerobic speed or sort of that threshold type sort of training. Now, great tools again. MAS, I've used it extensively in training people, for those higher intensity type sort of things, 3.2s and stuff like that. But with that underlying assumption that they have a sound aerobic base. Whilst MAS is great, it's objective. You run a 1,600 meter time trial or a whatever amount of time trial that you want, and and then it works out how many meters per second you travel, and then you can base your intensities off that and bits and pieces. It's really good, but there's a lot of mechanical stress And when I say mechanical stress, like ligaments, tendons, bones, muscles involved with that high intensity running. So again, this is where the complementary stuff, the strength, which works all of those things, and hopefully you can start to see this sort of unfolding as we go along, the interplay between all of these capacities to set us up for success. But yeah, MAS is a good tool. Threshold training, again, running at those higher intensities, sort of 160, 170, whatever it may be, if you've got the heart rates there, or, you know, based off a test and a running test that you've done and based off distances, are both really good tools, and I think, you know, should be in programs, but dosed in appropriately, knowing and underpinning that foundational quality, which is aerobic capacity at the base.
So, no, like, I suppose acknowledging that it is easy to overdo that threshold running and to sort of incorporate it, but it can't be your whole program. Yeah,
for sure. And I think the thing that makes those things attractive as well is that it's quick.
Yeah.
And it's efficient, right? Like, and we're all time.
I don't want to run for 50 minutes at zone 2. Yeah. I can do a 20-minute session of threshold running.
And I want the biggest bang for my buck. And look, to be honest, like sometimes, and, you know, it's probably counterintuitive to what I've been saying, like if someone needs to get faster and quicker in a really short amount of time, they might not have the ability, like let's say they're on a 30-day warning for a BFA or something like that. And they're 10 days out and they've just come to you and said like, oh, I need you to get me better in 10 days. It's like,
well, what did you do for the last 20 days?
Strap in. We're probably going to hit and stay in threshold and utilize some tools like MAS because that big bang for the buck. But the risk is obviously exposing that people to that more higher intensity stress. You know, the propensity or likelihood of injury increases, which is counterintuitive again to what we want to do in any physical preparation program. We don't want to injure people.
Yeah.
We want to train them in these capacities, in these underlying capacities, so that they can do the job and not get injured.
Yeah, awesome. So that's threshold, and not an ideal circumstance, but hopefully we have far more time than 10 days to increase. Yeah. So we're going for ideals. We're not going for like, you know, sort of must-dos. But if we go to, so I suppose that's threshold, cardiac power. Is this the ideal one we talked about with the strength? Where are we sort of sitting on with using cardiac power? Yeah,
so that's another tool that should be in people's toolboxes, and it raises the aerobic ceiling. The problem with it is it's quite, again, it's a more higher intensity method of training, and it can be quite fatiguing. So, you know, you would want to dose it in and have some, it's like your threshold and like your MAS, have like some recovery tailored in the next day, or, you know, you wouldn't put like a couple of high stress if you were doing double days or sessions or whatever it may be. You probably wouldn't pair it with something else that was high stress as well. But again, another cardiac power. And again, that's a Joel Jamieson sort of vernacular that used to describe that method of training. But it's certainly another thing that you need to add to your toolbox.
That awesome stuff. So if we zoom back out though, so we've done a lot of individual training and stuff, and how we should train, our own limitations, or not limitations, but not strengths, I suppose. You know what I mean? So we know where we're strong, work the stuff that we're not so strong to get to the capacity where we're really good at our job and more broadly.
Yep.
So if we zoom out a little bit to running sessions, right? In the last session, we talked about like group running, have a whole platoon on a road, put the short people at the front, just run. It's like, that's terrible, because we now know if you're training to all of these different measurements, the people at the front are training in a different system, at a different rate of effort than the people at the back who are like...
Yeah, they're running threshold in a zone 2 session.
Yeah. So if we know that, I think that's one of the important things that I've taken from you specifically, because in the first episode, I argued that, you know, as a platoon commander, you get in there, you want to do platoon PT all together. Don't do that, I think is what sparingly do that, but more broadly, how do we separate, or like what do we use to separate those? And is it okay to have people doing different things, like you argued, because it works, like not everyone's exactly the same? Absolutely.
So, you know, I've used the word ability-based groups, and it's, you know, been used a lot throughout the physical training sense, for a very long time. But certainly I think the tools that we've talked to today and the frameworks and actually doing that analysis, like looking at it, you know, what does Todd need from a strength capacity standpoint? And you might have like, okay, cool, we're going to have 3 primary exercises, and then everyone's going to come together and do some cardiac output at the back end of that session. But Todd's doing a power emphasis at the start, and then he's doing some strength maintenance, and then he's doing some muscular endurance hypertrophy work at the end. 60 kilo Private Nicholson is doing hypertrophy at the front end, and some maintenance strength, and then just because he doesn't have the underpinning strength quality to produce a lot of power, might be doing some low-level plyometrics for power work at the end. So I think, looking at it from that lens, it sort of starts to scaffold and unfold, and you can look at it and say, well, and hopefully listeners out there can look at their training, their sections training, their platoons training, and say like, yeah, I get it, right? Like using these models and looking at what different people need, we can tailor that program individual based off their ability. But like I argued in the last one, that's it. That's all at the 1 hour, the 2 hour gym. The whole platoon's there. You're all getting after it. You're just getting after what you need. From an aerobic capacity standpoint, it's probably even easier because, like I said, the measurement stuff that we have, your 2.4s, or if you're running some MAS, you've run a 1600 meter time trial, and everyone knows their individual distances and bits and pieces as well. Like the jets might be running, if you're doing super maximal 120%, 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off, they're running 80, 90 meters. The average Joes are back at the sort of 70 meters, but they're, that stress is dosed based off their ability and their underlying capacity. So, I guess that's a strength and an aerobic example. And in the zone 2, absolutely, you're right. Use the heart rate monitor. It's okay. You don't need to form up in 3 files on the road, running change, and all run at the same pace. It's just not the most optimal way to get after it.
Yeah, and like you said, the accessibility now, like almost everyone you look at, and they've got Spy Kids watches, like with heart rate monitors and shit in like either Apple Watches or Garmin's and all that sort of stuff. It's so accessible now. You don't have to issue them out.
Yeah.
It's okay to slow down and run at zone 2. That's
fine. And I think organisationally, and we're probably starting to, make that shift now, that it is okay. And I look back to, and in the first episode I just got to the battalion, and it was like, you just go as hard as you can for as long as you can until you almost probably fall over or spew or whatever. It's not the case.
Yeah, all right. If we look at, so combining all of what we know and what we've gone through there with our work stuff now, occupational demands and stuff, you've got some things that you've called avatars. Just explain what they are, I suppose, and how they help us to design what proportion of the week we should be spending, or what proportion of a training program we should be spending on each sort of system or quality. Yeah,
for sure. So I think we spoke in the last episode, and you sort of challenged me around what's the difference between an elite sport and the military context. And I sort of spoke to, they have a really granular understanding of all of these objective metrics of what the demands are. And I also spoke to that, through the PESA research, the military has some of that information, not as granular, but there's some really good frameworks and heuristics and data out there that we can talk to. So, during the PESA research stage, they obviously had all of their objective data from all of the, working, getting out into units and strapping monitors to people and getting them to march around and doing all of that objective information. They then also did these trade task confirmation working groups where they got a whole heap of subject matter experts in the room and said, well, hey, this is what the objective information tells us. What does that look like? Like, is that replica of what you do day to day? And then they sort of walked through those working groups, and they probably came to the middle ground and the truth there somewhere. Out of those trade task confirmation working groups, they generated these reports, and there's a lot of really good information in there. So I had a really good junior NCO that worked with me up in Townsville. He's now a sergeant up there, Todd Tavis, 4HB at the 3 Brigade Gym. Shout out to Todd. Yeah. And I sort of challenged him, and I gave him all of these trade task confirmation working group documents, and I said, pull all of the data out of that and put it into a meaningful athlete. If anyone's looked at like athlete webs or, that sort of radar graph, we use it here in training. Hey, they're strong in this area, they're not in that area. And from that gave us a really good baseline and heuristic and, I guess snapshot of what some of the trades, and unfortunately I didn't have all of the trade task confirmation working groups so for all of the trades across Army, but it gave us a really good snapshot of what people need. So, and when we talk to these avatars, I'm applying those percentages of those capacities that they identified through that objective and subjective research to build, this is what the program needs to look like.
So, and how is it tailored, I suppose, between sort of like, for example, you talked about multiple different trades, but like let's go for 2 examples, for example.
Yep.
Like what's the difference in how you train? Because you could easily apply the same training program to 3 Brigade and just be like, this is what you're going to do, but that's not the idea that you're talking about. We're smarter than that now, you're right? So
for sure.
What are the 2? Can you give us 2 examples of the contrast between those different trades?
Yeah, for sure. So the 2 that I'll talk to today, and I'm probably tried to look at across the data that I had like 2 opposing trades, just to give a snapshot and how that would look. So the first one I'll talk to is the infantry soldier. And now I'm not talking like a specialist infantry soldier in support company, you know, recon sniper, mortar, whatever else it is, because they actually have different demands. Just your general infantry soldier. You know, the research out there says that like 50% of the occupational tasks that the general infantry soldier conducts, the primary limiting capacity for success in those tasks is aerobic capacity. So, you know, straight up, 50% of an infantry training program, whatever that is, whatever 50% is, if it's 5 days, you know, or 3 days or whatever, should be focused in and around aerobic capacity. That's what the data says.
Yeah.
You know, the next quality, 25% to strength, and then in even quantities, sort of 12.5% both strength, endurance, and anaerobic capacity. So, you know, that gives you a really good snapshot and I guess a framework to work to when developing your program. Is like, this is what the data, objective and subjective, says. We've already laboured the point of physical training should set us up to complete, you know, the physical demands of our occupation. We can now work with that. And as I said, and we'll probably tease apart what a 3-day and a 5-day program might look like, factoring in those percentages. But yeah, that's a really good tool. We'll drop that in the notes. I'll just have to check the classification on those pairs of documents. I might drop those out of there, but there's certainly the radar graphs and you know, those capacities that are required for those individual jobs. That's open source, so we can put that in there.
And build like a bit of a toolbox so that if anyone wants a deep dive on it, there's heaps of information. We'll put it all on the Code website.
Yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we contrast that being that, you know, which is surprising, 50% aerobic,
Yep.
25% strength,
Yep.
and then we've got 12.5% anaerobic. We're talking about like if you did 2 sessions of sprints per week and then heavy lifting for the rest of the week, you would not be hitting like where you should be.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And on the flip side, if all you did was what I did back in the day is pack march, push up, pull up, and run around the ring road, you've now neglected like that strength, which is, you know, a quarter of the capacity that you require, and some of those other like underpinning, you know, anaerobic type sort of tasks there as well. So yeah, it's a really helpful framework in framing what do we need to do, and it's linked to objective data. It is just not the world according to Tav, like a lot of the episode has been. It's linked to objective data around what people are required and what that limiting physical capacity for success in most of those occupational tasks that those ladies and gents do on a day-to-day basis. So it's a good framework to work to.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, all right, if we directly contrast that against a different trade, let's talk to something completely different and talk to the demands on a completely different occupation. Yeah,
for sure. So as I said, looking back through my data, I tried to pull 2 that were sort of at different ends of the spectrum, and probably a trade that's close to your heart, being a RAMI officer. But yeah, vehicle mechanic. So if we look at that, you know, the demands are fundamentally different to an infantry soldier, right? So you would suggest that the data, the objective and subjective data that they drew out of that PESA research process would be different, and it absolutely is. It's almost flipped. So 33% strength is the underpinning quality that they need, 50% muscular endurance, and then 16.7% anaerobic. Sorry, I just had to look at my notes there, just so I didn't stuff up those percentages. But yeah, so again, fundamentally different. The issue with people would look at that and go,
I don't have to do any cardio.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's plenty of VMs out there that are like,
they're in protective dress, those tiny shorts and like the King G shirt, and they're just like, trying to be as big as they can.
Absolutely. They're like, amen. Tab said I don't have to do any cardio.
Yeah.
Gents and ladies and gents, that's not the case. Because, you know, we look at it and go, hey, cool, aerobic capacity and aerobic fitness is certainly a really important quality for health, longevity, and fitness as well. But I guess I just made those comparisons there and the differences to show that like that argument that I've sort of hopefully hammered home over the last 2 episodes is one size does not fit all. One program does not fit every individual.
Yeah.
You know, the objective data says that as well, right? And you look at it and it's kind of a no shit statement. An infantry soldier and a vehicle mechanic, fundamentally different things. Like they're swinging off hammers, they're in awkward positions, they're they're pulling engines out of cars and all of these different things. That stuff is heavy. No wonder, you know, strength is a primary physical capacity that limits success in most of their occupational tasks. But yeah, those kind of things, and hopefully now as this episode has unfolded and I guess with that objective analysis there, people are starting to see, okay, cool, there's a fair bit that goes into programming, and there's some really good tools and frameworks and things out there that we can pull threads from to build our program.
And we'll just continue to build that as well so that everyone has access to it, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that thing about when you're given a program, you're like, this doesn't make sense to me, or it looks different. And why am I splitting up into groups? And like, I want to do more lifting. He gets to lift massive weights, and I have to do like power stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the go? Yeah. This is the basis behind why that is the case. Type thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, culturally, as an organization, that's probably a hard pill to swallow, and hence why that hasn't happened overnight, right? And we're not probably quite there yet.
Yeah.
We're moving in the right direction, but you know, we're probably, and I spoke to it last time, we're anchored sometimes to the way that we did things because that's the way we've always done it, and little bits and pieces like that. But I think, you know, hopefully, and what I've tried to do across these two podcasts is, and again, it's the word according to Tav, but yeah, communicate that there's more to it, and we probably should look deeper and draw out some of the stuff that's out there, some of the research, and, you know, try and align ourselves better with preparing people specifically for what they need to do rather than what they want to do.
Sweet. Warrant Officer Class 2, Tavis Nicholson, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We talked to physical qualities, designing training, going from the individual then to ability-based groups and sort of splitting up sessions, some counterintuitive stuff that was like run slower, you know, you'll get better. It's like, that doesn't seem like, doesn't make sense, but obviously we know it is. Strength training, aerobic training to build that base inside the model, but or the pyramid that underpins everything else when we get to race day or the event, the main event at the peak of the pyramid. And then you talk to the avatar stuff, which is genuinely talking about occupational demands and sort of overlaying that onto your training. So we know that an infantry soldier from the 1st Battalion is not going to train the same as a vehicle mechanic at the 3rd Combat Service Support Battalion. Completely different. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely awesome.
No dramas there. Thanks for having me, and all the best for the future. I know this is one of the last episodes there, but yeah, certainly I've enjoyed coming on and listening in on some of the other guests that you've had on. I'm in the STEAM company, and I'm humbled that you've reached out and brought me along on the journey. Thanks so much.
Our resident PTI. You've got to stay on. Thanks so much, Tav. It's been awesome. Thanks.
Cheers, sir.
Bye.
Ta.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.